Hello and welcome to Spinster's Library. I'm Claudia and I haven't spoken about classics in a hot minute on this channel. So today I am going to tell you about 10 classics authors who I want to explore, whose works I haven't yet read at all. In case you didn't know, because like I said, I haven't mentioned it on my channel in a while, I love classics. My personal definition of a classic, by the way, is any book that was written or published before 1960, though I should mention that one of the books on my list actually breaks that rule, but it is a book that is generally considered a classic, so I have included it in here. So I want to talk to you about 10 authors of classics that I haven't read at all. So there are so many classics authors whose works I have read and who I want to explore more. For example, Daphne du Maurier and Charles Dickens and E.M. Forster and Anne Bronte. There's a lot of authors where I've read one or two of their books and I really want to read more of that, but that's not what this list is about. So here are 10 authors that are completely new to me that for whatever reason I really want to read. All of the books and authors mentioned are going to be listed in the description box as well, with links to their books if you're interested. And of course I'm always interested in hearing your opinion, so comment down below to tell me which of these 10 authors you have already read, which you can recommend and which you maybe want to warn me about. I would also in this video like to make the case for reading favorites and reading mainstream popular novels. Now all of these authors that I'm going to talk about, I'm going to mention their most popular books, their most talked about books, the works that they are known for. And I don't really understand the sort of hipsterism around not wanting to read those mainstream novels, because there is a reason that Pride and Prejudice is Jane Austen's most popular novel, and there is a reason why Jane Eyre is Charlotte Bronte's most popular novel. So I am just unashamedly going to talk about the favorites, the mainstream, the most popular books of these authors, because that's just where I want to start with them. Another thing I'd like to mention before we get into the list is that I'm specifically talking about novels today. Poetry is a whole other issue. It's something that I kind of want to be into, but also kind of am not into. So I've just decided to leave poetry out of this list completely and just talk about novels. Let's get started with a Victorian darling of BookTube, Thomas Hardy. He is talked about a lot on the sort of channels that I follow on BookTube. He seems to be pretty universally popular with the classics crowd, and I have not yet read any of his books. Now his big works that I hear mentioned over and over again seem to be Jude the Obscure, Far from the Madding Crowd and Tess of the D'Urbervilles, and I definitely want to pick up one of these books at some point this year. I haven't got any Thomas Hardy books yet on my TBR shelf behind me, but I'm sure I will come across one of his novels at some point on my charity shop exploits. The second author, and this is another Victorian novelist that I want to explore, is George Eliot, and I actually do have one of her novels on my TBR, which is Silas Marner. This is an absolutely tiny book. It's under 300 pages long, and I'm sure I'll be able to squeeze it into this year's Victober. At least that's the plan. She also wrote Middlemarch, which is another one of her big novels, and apparently it is physically absolutely massive. So I think in this case I'd rather stick with the small book, the manageable book first, and then if I like that one, move on to Middlemarch. The third author is the one where I said actually breaks the rules of my definition of a classic. We're talking about Sylvia Plath. Now she is mostly known as a poet, but I've already mentioned my issues with poetry, and I am in fact going to read her only novel, which is The Bell Jar, which is from 1963. So that's 3 years after my cutoff point for classics. Are we going to be pedantic about this? I'm certainly not. You are welcome to. I just feel like it wouldn't be right for me not to ever read Sylvia Plath. Everyone I know who's read her poems and her novel raves about her, so there's got to be something about it. I know nothing about the book itself. I don't know what genre it is. I don't know what it's about. I don't know if it's a big book, a small book, an easy book, a hard book. I guess I'll find out. Again, this is another one where I don't actually have the physical book yet, but I'm sure I'll find it in my charity shop exploits. Number 4 on the list, and now we are going way back, and we are talking about Homer. This is a classic in the true sense of the word, and I am particularly keen on reading the Odyssey because I hear that it is a little bit easier and a little bit more fun to read than the Iliad. I just feel like I have to read one classic epic at some point in my life, right? Did I say this was going to be about novels? I mean, this is very clearly not a novel, but it is a narrative, so I guess I'm including it in this list anyway. This is so all over the place. I should have planned this out better. Should have planned my hair better as well, because it's just ever so slightly too big to properly fit in frame. Anyway, Sally Allen, who commented on one of my videos last week, spoke about the importance of picking a good translation for Homer, and she recommended someone called E.V. Rieu. But frankly, I'm not sure yet if I would rather read Homer translated into English or translated into German. German is my first language, so I would probably pick a German translation. So I have to do some research and find a good translation. And that's probably not the kind of book that I would find in a charity shop unless I'm particularly lucky. And there happens to be a copy of exactly the German translation I want in one of the local North Wales charity shops that I frequent. I would be open to listening to the Iliad or the Odyssey on audiobook, because with verse I find it a lot easier to hear it than to actually read it. So maybe that's something I should do with my next Audible credit. But now let's move on to number 5 on the list, an absolute classic of the early 20th century, Virginia Woolf. I have actually planned to read her early novel Night and Day for my 4 Centuries project. If you're not aware of that, this is a reading project I'm doing this year where I read 4 books from 4 centuries between 1719 and 2019. And Virginia Woolf's novel Night and Day was published in 1919. That's why that's already on my TBR for the year. However, as I said earlier, I do like to read mainstream novels as well, so I'm sure I'll pick up To the Lighthouse or Orlando at some point as well. Sticking with the 20th century, we then move on to George Orwell, and really the one book that I'm keen to read is 1984. I feel just slightly embarrassed. I know I shouldn't be. I feel just slightly embarrassed that I haven't read 1984 yet, because it is such a classic of the 20th century. It's such a classic of the genre of dystopian fiction, and I really enjoy 20th century dystopian fiction anyway. I really like the sort of mid-century dystopian novels, and 1984 is an absolute must for me. Again, I'm just waiting to find this one in a charity shop. For the next author, let's jump back into the Victorian age, and this is actually an author who was recommended to me many times in the comments to my videos. People keep saying, you need to read Margaret Oliphant, you'd love her. So here I am, looking at her incredibly prolific list of works of more than 120 books. And honestly, I don't know where to start with her. So if you are familiar with Margaret Oliphant's writing, can you please recommend a really good book of hers to start with in the comments? From what I can hear, she sounds right up my street, mostly writing domestic novels with slightly creepy elements sometimes, but also influences of realism. Basically, she sounds a lot like Bronte in terms of style. And I would really love to dive into her books, but I genuinely don't know which one is the best to start with. So please help me out. The 8th author that I want to explore is a German 20th century classic, and this is Irmgard Keun. Now, she is becoming more popular as an influential writer of the 20th century, but I think it is personally scandalous that I never read anything of hers in school, that I didn't even hear about her in school. So now I want to catch up. She's known for her very interesting progressive portrayals of women, and this book, Das Kunstseidene Maedchen, is from 1932. I do believe it has been translated into English. Again, check the description box for the English title and link to it. And this particular book is from 1932, which of course, was just before the Nazis took over Germany in 1933, so it will be particularly interesting to read this within its historical context. I really can't wait to get to this. I'm so chuffed that I found this one in a bookshop in Germany when I last went to visit my parents. Staying in Germany, we have a much more well-known classic of the German 20th century, which is Der Zauberberg by Thomas Mann. This is a chonker of a book, if I may say so, and I am slightly intimidated by it. However, it is an absolute classic and I really do want to read that at some point. I imagine that this is going to be maybe a summer read for me, where I have a little bit more time and a little bit more mind space to focus on a book, because this is huge. Now, the last author on the list, and I do feel a little bit bad for him because basically there's just one of his novels that I'm interested in reading, and that is Dracula by Bram Stoker, another Victorian classic. Is it Victorian? It is Victorian, isn't it? It doesn't say. Oh yes, yeah. So this is late Victorian. And yeah, I don't even know if he wrote any other books, but if he did, I'm not really that interested in them. I really want to read this Gothic horror classic. Maybe, if I fall in love with it, I will look at his list of works on Wikipedia and explore some of his other novels, if he's got any. I don't even know. So that was my 10 authors that I want to explore that I haven't yet read any books from. Most of these I am going to save for readathons. I know that Booktober is coming up again this year. Maybe there will be another classics-a-thon that I can read some of these for. This is by no means a TBR for this year. I fully realize that I'm not going to get to all of these authors and all of these books within this year, because I'm not doing great at reading at the moment, to be honest. But at some point within the near future, I would like to read some of these works. So I really want to know your opinions. Are there any of your favorites in there? Any books on this list that you absolutely hate? And also, which classics authors do you really want to read but haven't yet explored at all? Thank you so much for watching. Bye!